When my son called me a divorced loser and laughed as I drove off in my old truck, I said nothing. 2 weeks later, I bought the company that laid him off and took the seat he never saw coming. By the time he stood up in that boardroom, it was too late. Arrogance must be corrected, and silence can be the sharpest blade. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I still wake up at 5:30. No alarm needed. Just my body remembering the decades I spent rising before the sun, tying up my boots, and heading out to the garage. I haven't touched a wrench in 5 years now, not since I sold the business, but the rhythm stayed. Habit, or maybe something deeper. When you've lived a life of labor, silence becomes the first thing you trust. My name's Daniel, and I'm 69 years old, divorced, retired, still living in the same modest house just outside of Millersville, tucked between the hills and a long-forgotten road that barely shows up on GPS. It's quiet here, and most days I prefer it that way. I make my coffee the way I always have, black, strong, no nonsense. I drink it out on the porch, sitting on the same creaky wooden chair I built back when my son was still in middle school. He helped me sand the armrests, got more dust on himself than the chair. That was a good day. We didn't have many like it after that. His name's Matt, 36, lives in the city now, wears designer clothes and calls himself a strategic operations manager for some tech startup. I couldn't tell you what that means if you paid me. The last time I visited him, I wore my flannel jacket, and he asked if I owned a real coat. Said I looked like I just walked out of a thrift store. I told him the coat was older than him, and still warmer than anything synthetic he could buy. He didn't laugh, but I did. I don't see him much. We talk maybe twice a year, if that. Last Christmas, he didn't call. This past birthday, he texted HBD, old man. I replied, thanks. Never heard back. Still, I sent him a card every year. Handwritten. Always include a photo. Him as a baby. Him riding the tractor with me. Him holding his first bike. Maybe I do it more for me than for him. Just something to remind myself that it was real once. That I did all that. I built an auto repair shop from nothing. Started in my 20s with a broken lift and a borrowed toolbox. By my 40s, I had 4 full-time mechanics, 2 bays, and more loyal customers than I could handle. I worked 6 days a week for 35 years. Missed vacations, anniversaries, hell. Almost missed Matt's high school graduation when a client's transmission blew 2 towns over. I gave him everything I had, even when things between me and his mother fell apart. She said I was emotionally absent. Said I lived in the shop, not the marriage. Maybe she was right. I didn't fight her when she left. I just signed the papers and packed the rest of her books into boxes she never picked up. She moved across the country. Matt stayed with me for a while. I tried. God knows I tried. But over time, I became the quiet background noise in his life, the man who paid for college, co-signed his first apartment lease, fixed his car when he didn't even ask. And I never complained. Not once. People like me, we don't talk much. We act. We build. We endure. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. I still drive the same Ford pickup I did 20 years ago. The same one I gave to Matt when he turned 16. I spent a month restoring it. Painted it navy blue. Rebuilt the carburetor myself. Even stitched the torn leather on the seats. I handed him the keys with tears in my eyes. He drove it for 2 years before trading it in for something sleeker. I bought it back from the lot. Didn't tell him. Still drive it to this day. The passenger seat still has the faded stain from the orange soda he spilled on our trip to Lake Tahoe. I never cleaned it. Never wanted to. It reminds me of the version of him I still talk to in my head. The version that asked me questions, wanted to ride in my truck, and called me Dad with awe in his voice. Now I'm just Daniel, or more recently, a divorced loser. He said it, plain as day, right to my face. But that comes later. This part of the story, the part I'm telling you now, this was still the quiet before the storm. The last few days before my world tilted again, before the betrayal showed up in broad daylight, before the laughter, before the cold silence, before I walked into that building and made him stand up. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, or rather a call Matt forgot to hang up properly. I had tried to reach him earlier that week, left a message. Nothing urgent, just checking in. The house had flooded a bit from the storm, and I figured I'd finally replace the gutters like I'd been putting off for years. I remembered he once helped me clean the roof, back when he still called on Sundays. I thought maybe he'd want to swing by, lend a hand, or at least talk for a few minutes. He didn't pick up, but a few hours later my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I answered. Matt? He didn't hear me. Instead, I heard laughter in the background, faint but sharp. Voices. A group of people, maybe coworkers or friends. Then Matt's voice, clear as anything. Nah, that was just my dad. Probably calling to talk about car parts again. He's still driving that rust bucket. Guy's a walking stereotype. Divorced, broke, still clinging to the past. More laughter. Then someone asked, He's still around? Matt replied, Unfortunately. Every holiday he tries to invite himself. I usually ignore it. He doesn't get the hint. Can't blame him, I guess. His whole life ended when Mom left. He just never moved on. I stood there holding the phone, breathing through my nose, heart sinking like an anchor through my chest. I didn't hang up. I just listened, quiet as I could, to the sound of my own son turning me into a punchline. It wasn't what he said that hurt the most. It was how easily he said it. Like I was some outdated piece of furniture he couldn't throw away yet. After a few more lines I won't repeat, he must have realized the call was still active. There was a pause. Then, click, the line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen I had rebuilt after the divorce, staring at the calendar on the wall. I hadn't marked Christmas yet. I was waiting to see if he'd call. I guess that was my answer. The next day I got a package from him. No note, no return label. Inside was a store-bought gift basket. Crackers, jam, a tiny jar of caviar. Something a corporate assistant probably picked. Something meaningless. There was a sticker on the side. Happy Holidays from the Stratop team. Strategic Operations. Not from Matt, my son. From a brand. From a role. From a title he wears like a suit of armor. I didn't touch the basket. I slid it under the sink with the unopened wine from last year's client gift. Out of sight. Later that week, I drove out to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I sat on the bench for a while, watching the trees shift in the wind. I didn't cry, not then. But I did talk. To my father. To the man who raised me with quiet expectations and calloused hands. I told him I was sorry. For whatever crack I passed down. For wherever I failed as a father. For becoming a man whose only son now talks about him like a burden. And I promised something that day, as the clouds moved slow and heavy above the hills. I wouldn't let the story end like this. Not with silence, not with shame, and certainly not with a laugh at my expense. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone rang again. I'd spent the morning out in the shed rearranging some old toolboxes and oil cans, trying to find something that didn't feel like sorting through ghosts. The old place had too many echoes in it, from my wife's perfume that never quite left the hallways, to my son's laughter when he used to run barefoot through the kitchen. These days, the only footsteps I hear are my own. When I saw Matt's name flash on the screen, my thumb hovered over the answer button longer than it should have. A part of me hoped it was a mistake, a butt dial, Maybe a message left by accident. But no, this time he meant to call. "Hey," he said, like we'd spoken just yesterday. I waited. There was no apology, no explanation for the voicemail he left playing while I heard him mock my entire existence. Just his voice, sharp, impatient, like he had somewhere better to be. He sounded exactly like the kind of man who would roll his eyes at old stories and call kindness sentimental baggage. "I need a favor," he said next. That was it. 3 words. Not, "How are you?" or, "I'm sorry for what I said." Just the same tone he used when asking for jumper cables as a teenager. I stood there by the kitchen window, staring out at the tree I planted when he was born. Its branches were heavy now, bent with years. I couldn't tell if it had thrived or suffered like I had. Maybe a little of both. "What do you need?" I asked. I didn't say it warmly. I didn't say it coldly. Just flat. A man reading lines from a script he already knew the ending to. "Work's been rough," Matt started. "They did layoffs this week. Whole department gone. Restructuring, politics, the usual crap. I'm lining up a few interviews, but I need to cover rent for a month or 2. You know, just until it levels out." He delivered it smoothly, like he'd practiced it. Like he thought this version of the story would go over better than the truth. I could feel the heat in my chest starting to build. Not anger, not quite. More like pressure. Something pressing behind my ribs, waiting to release. I wanted to ask, why me? But I already knew the answer. Because he thought I still owed him. Because in his eyes my whole life was just a prelude to his. Because I was the man who never said no. Until now. "I heard your call," I said quietly. He didn't respond right away. "The one you forgot to hang up," I added. "Heard every word." There was a long pause. Then a soft, disbelieving, "What?" "I heard you laugh. I heard what you said about me. About the truck. About being a divorced loser. About holidays. About Mom." Another pause. This one heavier. "You're taking that out of context," he said finally, voice colder now, more defensive. "It was just a joke. You know how people talk when they're blowing off steam." "You meant it." "Even if I did," he snapped, "maybe that's because you never listen unless you're hurt." He was unraveling, shifting the blame. That was always his way. Back when he got caught cheating on tests. Back when he got pulled over with beer in the back seat. It was always someone else's fault. "You want to talk about hurt?" I asked. "I'm calling for help, and you're digging up some stupid voicemail?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do the work. He filled it, like he always did, with arrogance. "You know what? Never mind. I forgot who I was talking to. A guy with grease under his nails and no degree. You think fixing engines makes you smart? You're a relic. Just a divorced loser sitting in a chair that nobody visits." There it was. The words that sat like gravel in my chest. The version of my son I never wanted to see fully. Now standing in front of me, no filter, no mask. He hung up after that. No goodbye, no breath left between us. Just that final insult, dangling like a cracked bell still ringing after the rope's been cut. I sat down in my father's old chair, the same one I kept, by the window all these years. Outside, the truck was parked in its usual spot, the same one I had given him at 16, only for him to leave behind like a toy he outgrew. I stared at it for a while, and I thought about all the things I'd swallowed over the years. The apologies I never got. The birthdays missed. The way he always needed me, but never wanted me. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood what had to be done. The kind of man he thought I was, that man was gone now. And the man he was about to meet, he was just getting started. That night the house didn't creak. No wind rattled the window panes. No owls called out from the pine trees beyond the shed. Even the old refrigerator, which usually buzzed and hummed like it had thoughts of its own, stayed silent. It was as if the house itself knew something had shifted. I sat in my father's old chair long after the sun went down, staring into the dark, like it owed me answers. I hadn't turned on a light. The only thing glowing was the orange ember at the end of my cigarette, a habit I kicked years ago but kept one box in the freezer, just in case. That night it felt justified, deserved even. I wasn't angry. That's the part most people wouldn't understand. I wasn't yelling. I didn't punch the walls. I didn't call him back. I didn't scream at the air or curse God or fate or the poor job I must have done raising him. None of that. I just sat in the silence and let the words he'd thrown at me echo over and over. Divorced loser. Grease under his nails. No one visits. There are some insults that bounce off you, and some that lodge themselves into your ribs like dull knives. Not sharp enough to kill you, just sharp enough to stay. The thing is, I used to think I could earn his respect back. That if I was patient enough, quiet enough, supportive enough, he'd eventually see me again. The man who stayed. The man who gave him everything. The man who worked double shifts so Matt could have new cleats for soccer and books for college that he never even cracked open. But now I saw the truth. He wasn't just ungrateful. He was entitled to his own version of me. One he built over years of mockery and dismissiveness. One that fit neatly into the polished world he wanted to live in. And I had allowed it for far too long. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the old metal box I kept buried under blankets. Inside was everything important. The deed to the house, savings account paperwork, insurance forms, a letter from the VA, and a picture. The last one we ever took as a family before Mary left. Matt was 13. He had braces and wore that hideous hoodie he never took off. I was standing behind him, hands on his shoulders, proud as any father could be. Mary smiled, but you could already see the distance in her eyes, like she was posing for a life she'd already decided to walk away from. I stared at that photo for a long while, not out of grief. I think that part of me had been buried a long time ago, but it made me remember who I was before the silence, before everyone walked away and left me to grow old in a chair by a dusty window. I used to be a builder of engines, of homes, of trust. I could be that again, just not for them, not anymore. I slid the box back under the blankets and poured myself a glass of bourbon, the expensive kind I'd been saving for some special occasion that never came. I took it out onto the porch and sat beneath the stars. The air was sharp, cold, but not unpleasant. Across the yard, the truck sat exactly where I'd left it, still, waiting. Funny how machines are more loyal than people. I thought about the business, the old garage, the way I used to come home covered in sweat and grease, but full of purpose. I built something back then, something real. Maybe I could build again, but this time not for Matt. For me. For the man I used to be, before they made me feel small. Before I let guilt and shame convince me that silence was the same thing as peace. The next morning, I was up before the sun, already dressed. I brewed a pot of coffee, black as ever, and stared out the window as the first light broke over the hills. A quiet kind of resolve had settled in my chest. The kind that doesn't speak, doesn't announce itself. It just begins. I didn't know the full plan yet, not at that moment, but I knew this. I would no longer be a background character in my own story. Matt had taken enough. My silence had cost me enough. It was time to take something back, something more than dignity, something he'd never see coming. I wasn't born into wealth. My father was a machinist. My mother cleaned houses. We had a small home with mismatched furniture and a fridge that only worked when you kicked it. But I never felt poor, not once. My father's hands were always covered in metal dust, his shirts patched and thin, but he never let me go to bed hungry or without pride. When things broke, we fixed them. When we couldn't fix them, we adapted. That's what men like him did. What men like me do. I was 15 when I first fell in love with machines. My uncle let me shadow him at the body shop one summer, told me to sweep the floors, but I couldn't keep my eyes off the engines, the way they breathed back to life after being pulled apart. The order, the logic, the noise, they made sense to me. By 21, I had a small toolbox, 2 hands that never stopped shaking from work, and a head full of dreams no one else believed in. At 24, I married Mary. She was softer than me, sweeter, the kind of woman who ironed napkins for dinner and corrected your grammar mid-sentence. I loved her in a quiet way, the way men like me do, not with flowers or poetry, but with steady presence, with roofs that never leaked and tanks that were never empty, with hands that ached from labor but still built, cribs and rocking chairs. When Matt was born, I held him and felt something break open in my chest. I didn't cry. I just held him tighter than I probably should have, like the world might try to take him back. He had lungs on him, and a grip, even then, like he didn't want to let go. I swore I'd never miss a moment, and I didn't, not really. I worked long hours, sure, but I was always home to tuck him in. I fixed every toy he broke, carved him a wooden sword he used to carry to bed, took him to baseball games even when I could barely keep my eyes open. There was this one night, he was about 8, and it had rained for hours. Thunder shook the whole house. He came running into our room, crawled between us, and whispered, "Will the roof fall?" "No," I told him. "I built it myself." He slept soundly after that. I remember the first time he got hurt at school. Some bully knocked him over on the playground. He came home with a scraped elbow and watery eyes. I sat him down, cleaned the wound, and told him something my father once told me. Pain teaches you where your edges are, and who stands with you when you bleed. For a while, he believed me. For a while, I think he loved me like a hero. But then Mary left. She said I had grown too quiet, too steady, that the marriage felt more like maintenance than passion. She wanted someone who talked, not someone who showed love by replacing the broken water heater without saying a word. She didn't fight for Matt. She said he needed structure. So he stayed with me, for a few years at least. He changed during high school, started calling me old-fashioned, rolled his eyes when I told him to leave his phone at the table, said I didn't understand his world. Still, I paid for everything. First car, college tuition, rent when his job in marketing didn't cover it. I never asked for anything back, except respect. And even that, it seems, was too much. The last time I gave him something from the heart was the truck, his 16th birthday. I had been working late for weeks, extra jobs just to afford the upgrades. I sanded the body, repainted the chassis, rewired the dash myself. New tires, new seats, even put in a sound system, though I hated the noise. The day I handed him the keys, he hugged me tighter than he ever had, told me I was the best dad in the world. He drove it for 2 years before trading it in for a leased sports car with a Bluetooth dash. I bought it back from the dealership the next day, paid full price. They didn't understand why, but I did. It wasn't just a truck. It was every hour I'd spent building a life, every promise I made to that boy when he was too young to know what sacrifice looked like. Now I look at that truck like an altar, a place where my love still lives, even if he doesn't see it anymore. He may think I'm just an old man in a rusted Ford, but he doesn't know what these hands are still capable, Of 2 days after that last call, I got a text message. No greeting, no apology, just, "Hey, I need a favor again. Can you co-sign a lease? Just short term. I'll handle everything else." Promise. I stared at it for a long time. No please. No acknowledgement of what he'd said to me. No mention of the truck, or the voicemail, or the last 35 years of my life. Just another request, like I was a vending machine with no receipt tray. I didn't reply. Instead, I left the phone on the table and went outside to the workshop. The air had a bite to it that morning, the kind that settles in your joints and reminds you you're not 20 anymore. I didn't care. I grabbed a rag, wiped the dust off the front of the truck, and opened the hood like I was opening a memory. Sometimes machines give you more honesty than people ever do. Later that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into town and bought myself a decent dinner: steak, baked potato, and a piece of lemon pie. Sat in the corner booth of a place Matt used to love as a kid. I used to bring him there after baseball games. He always asked for extra whipped cream. He used to sit across from me with grass stains on his knees and ketchup on his chin, smiling like we had all the time in the world. I sat in that booth now, alone, older, quieter, and wondered if he even remembered those nights. Probably not. When I got home, I checked my phone. Still no follow-up from him. No, "Did you get my message?" Just silence. But the silence was about to break. The next morning, my phone pinged again. This time it wasn't from Matt. It was a forwarded message from my neighbor's son, a young man who still brings his car over to my place when something rattles. Good kid. He works downtown, near the leasing office for one of those high-end buildings where people drink iced coffee that costs more than a full breakfast. He'd overheard something. Apparently, Matt had gone into the leasing office and told them he'd secured a cosigner. Gave them my name. Claimed I had more money than I knew what to do with. Bragged that I was too old to say no. They ran a preliminary background check. My name was already tied to a credit profile they'd flagged for inquiry. Without asking me, without confirming, without even warning me, he'd used my name. Again. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the air in my lungs going flat. I thought of my credit, clean, guarded, protected. I hadn't missed a payment in 20 years, never took out a loan I couldn't pay back. Paid off the house, kept a simple retirement plan, lived small so no one could say I owed them anything. And now, he was using me like a discarded password, something he could enter into a system to unlock the next phase of his own life. I didn't call him. I didn't yell or demand an explanation. Instead, I called the leasing office myself. The woman on the line was polite, too polite. Said she was sorry for the confusion and grateful for my call. She told me they'd put the file on hold and requested identity verification from all parties. I told her I wouldn't be co-signing anything. Not now, not ever. Then I asked one last thing. Did he laugh when he said it? She hesitated. Excuse me? When he used my name, did he laugh? There was a beat of silence before she answered. Actually, yes. He said, and I quote, "Don't worry. He won't even notice. The guy doesn't check his mail." My hands clenched around the phone. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark kitchen with the receipt of betrayal pressed into my memory. He thought I was that out of touch, that unaware, that irrelevant. He'd forgotten that I built my entire life checking every bolt, every signature, every oil leak, that I knew how things failed, and more importantly, how to fix what others broke. But this wasn't just a leak. This was rot, and it ran deep. For a long time, I'd told myself that maybe Matt was just lost, caught in a culture that rewarded flashover foundation. Maybe he just needed time. Maybe I had failed him. But the truth was simpler. He thought I was disposable. He thought I was used. And that was the last mistake he'd ever make with my name. Certainly. Here is your next full section. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Not out of habit this time, but purpose. There was no tension in my body, no panic in my chest. Just a strange, settled kind of stillness. Like a man who spent too long listening, finally hearing his own thoughts again. I sat at the kitchen table, flipped open a legal pad, and wrote one sentence at the top. No more giving pieces of myself to people who only know how to take. It wasn't revenge that stirred in me, not exactly. I wasn't plotting something out of spite. No, this was something colder, older. A clarity that comes after you've been pushed one too many times and realize you're not waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for respect. Not for them to wake up and remember what you did for them. They didn't forget. They just stopped caring. But I remembered everything. That morning, I did what I used to do when something needed fixing. I went into the garage. I didn't touch tools. I didn't lift the hood of the truck. I opened the locked drawer in my old workbench, the one I hadn't opened since retirement. Inside was a small leather folder where I kept old contacts, accountants, attorneys, realtors, and clients who had turned into friends over the years. I flipped through them slowly until I found a business card I hadn't touched in a decade. Tommy Henderson, Henderson Equity Group. Tommy used to bring his Corvette into my shop every other month like it was a newborn baby. Nervous, full of questions. Young guy, but ambitious. We'd talk more than we worked. He told me about his dreams, finance, investments, building a portfolio strong enough to change people's lives. At the time, I thought it was just talk. But over the years, I heard things. That he'd done well. That he owned multiple companies now, including a few startups. I picked up the phone and called the number. To my surprise, he answered on the third ring. Tommy Henderson, he said, crisp and clean like a man who now wore suits tailored to people's expectations. Tommy, I said. It's Daniel Briggs. From Millersville Auto. There was a short pause, then laughter. Mr. Briggs. Hell, I thought you were halfway to Florida with a fishing pole by now. Retired, I said, but I've still got both hands and all my teeth. Still driving that old Ford? I smiled. Still runs better than half the Teslas in your parking lot. We caught up, briefly. I didn't need small talk. I needed something more valuable. Information. I asked about the company Matt worked for, the one that had restructured and laid him off. Tommy knew it instantly, knew the founders, knew the numbers, knew, too, that it was bleeding money and would likely be absorbed within the next 2 months by a parent company in his portfolio. Why do you ask? He said. Thinking of investing? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. But Tommy chuckled. Tell me what you're really after, Mr. Briggs. So I told him, not everything. Not about the insult or the voicemail or the forged credit check, but enough. Enough for him to understand that a man had drawn a line in the dirt and finally decided to step over it. He was quiet for a beat, then said, Well, you always did know how to tighten a bolt without stripping the thread. That was his way of saying, I'm in. I thanked him, hung up, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. I walked back out to the driveway and looked at the truck. It sat in the same place it always had, silent and ready. And for the first time in years, I didn't see something old. I saw something faithful. That night, I pulled out every document I had. Bank statements, property titles, trust accounts. I made sure every detail of my life was mine again. No open lines, no exposed credit. I froze anything he might have gotten access to. I contacted the bank, changed passwords, double-checked beneficiary names. He would find no doors unlocked anymore. He'd thrown his match, but I'd already doused everything in stone. The next day, I mailed the leasing office a notarized affidavit declining involvement. I requested written confirmation that my name would not be used on any binding documents. I copied the request to a lawyer I knew from years ago, a man who still owed me a favor after I kept his teenage son's DUI off the neighborhood radar. By the end of the week, my name was untouchable, and Matt had no idea. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't warning him. Because the thing about men like me is this: we don't announce storms. We just become them. Certainly, here is your next full section. By Monday morning, I had already made a second call to Tommy. This time, it wasn't just to catch up. I want in, I told him, not as a favor, not as a gesture, as a partner, silent, strategic. Tommy didn't hesitate. How much are we talking? Enough to make a dent, enough to raise eyebrows. He gave a low whistle through the line. I'll admit, I didn't see you coming, Briggs. That's the point. We set up a meeting for Thursday in a modest office in the next town over, somewhere quiet, off the radar, far from the sharp edges of Matt's world. In the days that followed, I gathered everything I needed. I sold a few old assets I hadn't touched in years, pulled funds from my retirement accounts, and even liquidated some savings bonds my father had left me. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't emptying the vault. I was investing in clarity, investing in the weight of my name, the same name my son had tried to use like a pawn, now becoming the signature that would undo him. At the meeting, Tommy walked me through the shell structure they'd used to acquire shares of the tech company Matt had once proudly posted about online, the one that had laid him off, the one hemorrhaging capital and teetering on the edge of acquisition, the one whose leadership had no idea that a ghost from the rural hills was about to become their majority voice. We'll build the LLC in another name, Tommy said, flipping through documents. Something unassuming. You won't be listed directly on the board until the ink's dry. Good. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. It's not just symbolic. You'll have power, real say. This is the company your son worked for, bragged about. I know. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You always were the quiet type. I should have known there was something under the hood. That made me chuckle. There always is. Within a week, we had signed the papers. I wired the funds. Nothing dramatic. No headlines, no fanfare. But piece by piece, I became the man with the pen in the room. A room my son didn't even know existed. Back home, I returned to my routines like nothing had changed. I drank coffee on the porch, watched the wind roll over the hills, waved to my neighbors' grandkids as they biked by. But something had changed. Inside me, something had clicked into place. A lever I didn't know I still had the strength to pull. For too long, I'd thought the world belonged to people like Matt. Fast-talking, good-smelling men in blazers who forgot who paid for their first haircut. I thought my time had passed, that my silence meant I'd faded into the background. But silence isn't absence. Silence is strategy. And my son? He never saw it coming. I followed the updates on the company's transition, quietly. Tommy fed me details, internal disarray, executive turnover, PR headaches, the kind of chaos that breeds opportunity. We're going to need someone to sit in on a few transition meetings, Tommy said one morning. Me? You? I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized the moment was coming. The moment I'd walk into his world not as a father begging for scraps of affection, but as the man holding the deed to everything he thought made him powerful. I'll be there. You sure you're ready to see him? I've been ready since the day he forgot who raised him. Tommy was quiet after that. Then he said something I hadn't expected. You're not doing this to humiliate him, are you? I paused. No. He waited. I'm doing this so he'll finally understand what I built with my hands. So he'll see that I was never the weak man he told his friends I was. So when he looks at the future, he sees my shadow standing behind it. Tommy exhaled. Then let's get to work. I didn't tell anyone in town, not my neighbor, not the boys at the diner. I just kept showing up for breakfast, tipping the waitress, and driving home in my old Ford like nothing had shifted beneath the surface. But the truth was, I had already walked into the building, not through the front door, but through the foundation. By the time Matt would hear my name again, I'd already be sitting at the head of the table. Certainly, here is your next full section. The thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it doesn't need fireworks. It's not loud. It doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It comes in layers, in paperwork, in signatures and silence, in the way a man walks into a room where no one expected him and sits down like he's always belonged there. And I was preparing for exactly that. By the second week of December, the acquisition process was in motion. I had become the majority investor in the holding company that now controlled a controlling interest in Novacor Dynamics, the tech firm my son had once proudly bragged about working for on social media, posing with his coffee mug and corporate badge like he'd built the empire himself. What Matt didn't know, what no one on his end suspected, was that the man he called a divorced loser was now reviewing internal budgets, board reports, and staffing schedules. His name popped up in a flagged HR note. Former staff member Ethan Briggs restructured 3 weeks ago. Recently requested meeting with COO regarding rehiring or placement. I read the line twice. South. He was trying to get back in. I leaned back in my chair and let out a low breath. He had no idea. I didn't move to block the meeting. I didn't call ahead or interfere. Number, that wasn't the trap. The trap was letting him believe he still had power. Tommy and I met once more that week to prepare for the upcoming transition briefing. The outgoing CEO had requested a formal handoff, in person, with the new ownership group. Good timing, Tommy said, sliding the folder across the table to me. Company wants a press photo. Something internal but symbolic. New faces at the table, executives, visionaries, big words. And you want me in it? I don't want you in it. I need you in it. I looked at the photo list. Headshots of every department lead, interim board advisor, and regional partner. All of them slick, young, polished. Then there was me, Daniel Briggs, 69, gray around the edges, still wears work boots to meetings. I nodded. Let them line up. The following Thursday, I drove into the city wearing the only suit I owned, navy blue, no tie. The truck rumbled under me, steady as ever. I parked in the underground garage of the Novacor building, the same one my son had walked into for the past 5 years, never once thinking a man like me would someday pull in with keys to the kingdom. At the front desk, I gave my name. The receptionist blinked. Then she stood up straighter. Mr. Briggs, she said. We've been expecting you. She handed me a guest badge with a gold stripe. Executive access. I took the elevator to the 24th floor. The doors opened to a floor of glass and marble, all cold tones and filtered light. Sterile, expensive, the kind of place people confuse with importance. Inside the boardroom, people stood chatting in low voices, suits, laptops, tablets, all of them trying to look busy and important. I stepped inside. No one recognized me, not yet. I walked to the far end of the table, where Tommy waited, already standing. He smiled, subtle and knowing. Mr. Briggs, he said, and his voice carried, not loud, but clear enough for everyone to hear. Our lead partner has arrived. Heads turned, eyes blinked. Conversation stopped. A woman near the coffee station whispered something into her colleague's ear. Another man squinted at me, trying to place my face. And then, just outside the glass doors, I saw him. Matthew. He was walking toward the room, folder in hand, clearly not expecting anything unusual, until he looked up and saw me. He stopped mid-step. His hand hovered over the door handle, as if touching it would confirm a nightmare. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move, just met his eyes. Level, calm, undeniable. Tommy turned toward the doors and said, "Ah, I believe we're joined by Mr. Ethan Briggs." Every head swiveled toward Matt. He stood there, completely still. Then, hesitantly, he entered the room. His eyes darted across the room. Some people greeted him, others didn't. He gave a nod to someone in legal, then started walking down the side of the table, until he reached the empty chair opposite me. He looked at the nameplate. It read, Daniel Briggs, Executive Partner, Henderson Group. He froze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up my pen and clicked it once, sharp, clean. He sat down slowly. For the first time in his adult life, my son didn't have a thing to say. And the meeting hadn't even begun. Absolutely. Here is your next full section. The boardroom had gone still. You could hear the soft clink of a teaspoon against a porcelain cup as someone stirred their coffee too long just to avoid looking at me. I sat at the head of the table, pen resting on the notepad in front of me, my nameplate catching the overhead light like it had always belonged there. Across from me, my son sat rigid, his fingers laced together too tightly. He wasn't breathing evenly. I could tell by the way his chest moved, shallow and uncertain. His eyes flicked between me, Tommy, and the projector screen at the end of the room, like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. But this wasn't a dream. This was his reckoning. The outgoing CEO began with formalities, quarterly figures, strategy handoffs, market analysis, the kind of language people in suits throw around when they want to sound smart and keep emotions out of business. I let him speak. I nodded when appropriate. All the while I kept my eyes on Matt. He didn't look at me, not once, and I didn't force it, because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to exist. Halfway through the meeting, someone brought in a stack of folders, personalized greeting cards for every person in the room. They were thick, heavy with context and direction. When the assistant reached me, he handed me mine with both hands and said, "Mr. Briggs." I nodded. "Thank you." I waited until every folder had been passed around. Then very calmly, I slid a single sheet of paper out of my briefcase, one I had printed that morning, crisp and clean. I placed it gently on the table in front of me. A few people noticed, glanced over. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I spoke. The first time I'd spoken since the meeting began. "I'd like to pause here," I said, my voice low but steady. "Before we go any further, I think there's something that needs to be acknowledged." The room quieted. Tommy looked at me and gave a slight nod. Matt looked up, only slightly, eyes hesitant, uncertain. I turned the document toward the center of the table. Printed at the top was a transcript, partial but precise. A voicemail recording. Nah, that was just my dad. Probably calling to talk about car parts again. He's still driving that rust bucket. Guy's a walking stereotype. Divorced, broke, still clinging to the past. You still talk to him? Unfortunately. Every holiday he tries to invite himself. I usually ignore it. Can't blame him, I guess. His whole life ended when Mom left. He just never moved on. Matt's head shot up. The color drained from his face. I didn't look at him. I addressed the room. This was recorded 3 weeks ago. I was on the other end of the line. No one moved, I continued. I've built things my entire life. With these hands. I lifted them slightly from the table, just enough for them to see the weathered skin, the calluses. A business, a home, a family. And for a long time, I thought being quiet, being consistent, was enough. I thought if I just showed up, worked hard and stayed present, the people I loved would understand the value of that. My eyes finally landed on Matt. He looked like a boy again. Small, nervous, trapped. But respect isn't inherited, I said. It's earned. And silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes, it's the sound of someone planning. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tommy sat back in his chair, hands folded, watching. Matt opened his mouth, probably to deny it, deflect, or spin the narrative. I raised one hand slightly, not angrily, just firmly. You don't get to speak right now. That froze him. I leaned forward just enough to let the gravity of my presence settle in the space between us. You thought I was just a divorced old man with a truck and some fading memories. Someone you could joke about, use, discard. But I didn't disappear, Matt. I rebuilt, quietly, thoroughly. And I made sure that the next time you saw me, it would be on my terms. I slid the transcript back into my folder, then nodded toward the screen. Now let's finish the meeting. The room didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then the CEO cleared his throat and continued, stumbling slightly over his notes. Matt didn't say another word. Not because he was silenced by me, but because the truth had already said enough. Of course, here is your full next section. The meeting wrapped without another word from him. When it ended, people shook hands and made polite comments, avoiding eye contact with Matt the way people avoid looking at something that just fell from a great height. Some gathered around Tommy, others made their way out quickly, murmuring about next steps and action items. I remained seated. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd waited years for that moment, not to humiliate him, but to correct the narrative. Not just for the people in that room, for myself. For every night I sat wondering if I had failed as a father, as a man, as something less than enough. Matt stood slowly, holding his folder like it weighed 100 pounds. He didn't look at me right away. His face was pale, eyes flickering like someone trying to rewrite the past in real time. I gathered my things, calm, measured. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard it. Dad. I paused. Didn't turn. He stepped forward, voice low. I didn't know you were part of this. This wasn't how I wanted to see you again. I turned just enough for him to see my face. Not angry, not smug, just resolved. This isn't about how you saw me, I said. It's about how you never looked. His lips parted like he wanted to say more. Apologize, maybe. Rewind something that couldn't be unwound. But there are things you don't get to come back from. I was going to call, he added quickly. To explain. You already did, I said. His brow furrowed. I took out the printed voicemail transcript from my briefcase, folded now, worn at the edges. You called me that day. You told me everything I needed to know. He reached for it. I didn't hand it to him. I'm not doing this out of revenge, Matt, I said quietly. I'm doing it because you needed to be reminded who I am. You forgot. Or maybe you never knew. His face changed. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. The fear of seeing a man stand taller than the lies you built about him. I don't want to lose you, he muttered. You're still my dad. I nodded. And you're still my son. Then I stepped into the elevator. I just don't know if that's enough anymore. The doors closed between us, and with them, 30 years of unspoken sacrifice and undeserved forgiveness. I didn't answer his text that night. The first one came just after 6 p.m. "Can we talk?" I didn't mean any of that then. It was a joke. You know how I talk when I'm nervous. And then later, "Please just don't shut me out." I turned off the phone and went to bed early. Slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke to 9 missed messages and a voicemail I didn't listen to. I knew what it would say. I'd heard it all before, just never with the script flipped. For decades, I was the one reaching out, waiting, holding space for someone who saw me as disposable. Now he knew what silence felt like. And it wasn't cruel. It was earned. Later that week, I took a walk through the small cemetery near town. The place where I buried my mother, my father, and eventually, when she passed last year, even Mary. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but I still arranged her burial. Quietly, respectfully. I visited her stone now, hands in my coat pockets, boots crunching on old gravel. "She'd be proud of you," a voice behind me said. It was Tommy standing with 2 coffees in hand. I took one with a nod. "She'd have hated the confrontation part," I replied, sipping. "But the quiet part, the planning, that was her style." We stood there a long time. No rush, no need to speak further. The dead don't ask for explanations. They just ask for peace. When I got home, the house was warm. Sunlight streamed in through the kitchen window just right. I took my old photo albums down from the shelf, the ones with Matt's childhood birthday parties, old cars, toolboxes, family barbecues. I flipped through them page by page, not with regret, with clarity. You can love someone and still draw the line. You can build a life and still rebuild yourself when they try to tear it down. Matt could send 1,000 messages. He could cry, beg, promise change. But some lessons aren't taught with words. They're taught with silence. Certainly. Here is your full next section. There's something sacred about stillness. Not the kind that comes from giving up. Not the hollow quiet of a man who's been beaten down. But the kind that arrives when you've said everything that needed to be said without raising your voice once. That's the quiet I live in now. A quiet I earned. It's been 3 weeks since that meeting. Matt hasn't called again. After the last flurry of messages, there was silence. No more voicemails, no follow-up apology. Just the digital distance that sits heavy between 2 people when they both know something's broken in a way that won't snap back into place. I didn't chase him. Didn't check to see if he'd posted something online. Didn't reach out to clear the air. Because the air was clear. It had just never been honest before. Most days I go about my routine the way I always have. I wake early. I make strong black coffee and drink it on the porch. I read the paper, the real one, not a screen. Sometimes I still catch myself checking the mail with a small twinge of hope that a letter from Matt might be waiting. Handwritten, folded with care. No return address needed. But that hope doesn't hurt anymore. It just exists. Like a song you've learned to hum without expecting the words to come back. I did, however, receive a letter last week. Not from Matt. From the NovaCorps board. A formal thank you. Polite, rehearsed language about transition, impact, leadership. Tucked inside was a check. A generous one. Payout from the merger now finalized. Stock sold at a premium. I folded it in half, slid it into a drawer, and haven't touched it since. I didn't do this for money. I did it because my name mattered. Because what I built mattered. Because the story of a quiet, divorced man in an old Ford wasn't supposed to end with shame or silence. It was supposed to end with dignity. And I reclaimed that on my own terms. I drove into town this morning, stopped by the old diner. The waitress, Fran, smiled when she saw me. "Coffee?" she asked. "Always." She poured it without asking how I'd been. That's what I like about her, about small towns in general. People here know when to leave you alone and when to let you feel like you're still part of something. As I stirred in the sugar, I looked out the window. A father and son were crossing the street, holding hands. The boy had red sneakers too big for his feet, flopping like they belonged to someone else. He pointed excitedly at something, a balloon or a bird, and the father laughed. I remembered that feeling, that weight of a small hand in yours. I remembered Matt at that age, the way he used to believe I could fix anything. When I left the diner, I drove up the ridge overlooking the town. Parked near the old overlook, the same spot where I used to take Matt when he had nightmares and couldn't sleep. We'd sit there in the truck, eating drive-through fries, and watch the headlights weave through the hills like tiny comets. He used to say, "They look like stars, Dad, like we're flying." I sat there today with the windows down, breeze cutting through the cab, engine ticking in its familiar rhythm. I looked out at the road, thought about everything that road had given me, and everything it had taken. Then I turned the key and let the engine go quiet. That night, just before sunset, I walked to the back porch and stood barefoot on the cold wood planks. The sky was burning orange, streaked with violet and bruised blue. I could hear the wind brushing through the trees, slow, steady, like breath. I thought about how easy it is to disappear in this world, how fast people move on from those who built their roads, paid their bills, raised them when no one else would. But I also thought about legacy, not the kind they name buildings after, the kind that stays, quiet, solid, unshakable, in the foundation of someone's memory. And I realized something. Even if Matt never calls again, even if he never says sorry, even if he still tells stories about the old man in the truck to people who don't know any better, he'll remember that room. He'll remember my name on that folder. He'll remember that when the world around him collapsed, I was the one standing, and I didn't yell. I didn't hit back. I just became the weight he couldn't ignore. Absolutely. Here is your final section, serving as a quiet but powerful epilogue to complete the story. 3 weeks passed before anything came again. It arrived not as a phone call, not as a text, but as a letter, an actual handwritten letter. I found it in the mailbox tucked between a local water bill and a flyer for a roofing company I'd never heard of. No return address, just my name in handwriting. I recognized immediately, though it had grown shakier with age. Matthew. For a long moment, I didn't move. Just stood there with the envelope in my hand, heart steady, mind quiet. I took it inside, sat down at the kitchen table, the same place I once sorted his school permission slips, paid his college tuition, and folded his laundry when he forgot to. The envelope wasn't sealed well. Just a lick and a crease. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined, folded twice. His handwriting was uneven, hesitant, but not lazy. "Dad, I don't expect you to write back. And I don't blame you if you don't. You were right. I did forget who you were. I let my own pride turn you into something small in my mind, because it made me feel bigger. It was easier than admitting how much. I've depended on you my whole life. I've replayed that voicemail every day since you showed it to me. It makes me sick to think I said those things. I wish I could take it back. Not because you heard it, but because you didn't deserve any of it. Not after everything. You didn't ruin anything. You built everything. And I broke it. I don't know how to be the kind of man you are, but I'm trying. And I just hope, if nothing else, One day, I earned the right to shake your hand again. Matt. I sat back and folded the letter once neatly. I didn't cry, didn't smile, didn't rush to write a reply. Instead, I slid the letter into the drawer with the old photo albums and the worn-out baseball Matt caught in Little League. It rested beside the will I'd revised last spring and the pen I used to sign the company transfer. That drawer had held memories, pain, and legacy. Now it held an apology, a quiet one, not a fix, but a start. That evening, I sat on the porch again, this time with no coffee, no paper, just the wind and the weight of things finally said, and the even heavier ones left unspoken. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, and I hadn't given it. Not because I didn't want to, but because forgiveness isn't a sentence. It's a decision made in silence, over time, without announcement. Maybe one day I'll write back. Maybe I'll pick up the phone when it rings. But for now, the quiet is enough. The land is quiet. The truck is parked. And I, Daniel Briggs, the man they called a divorced loser, have reclaimed everything they thought I had lost, not by shouting, but by becoming the consequence they never saw coming.